We're going to be waiting just a few more minutes, but welcome to our Zoom session of Myth and Story, brought to us by our special guest today, Dr. Will Linn. We'll begin just in a couple of minutes. I'm going to wait probably a minute or two longer just to make sure that we have spectators ready to listen on to this exciting opportunity here. So, and we're waiting. We'll just again from Doc, who's got. You can see his screen up. It's brought to us by Studio School. We'll talk more about Studio School in just a moment. But thank you for giving up your afternoon to come and talk to us. If it is afternoon, for most of us, it is from California over, I guess. I'm way in the Northeast. I'm Eric Larson. I'm from Manchester, Connecticut. I'm up in the Northeast. We're actually looking at snow this evening, which is just, what's going on? What is going on? This is an amazing time, unreal, where we're just trying to figure things out. That's why we're doing these sessions online. It's at the point today. Actually, I cut my hair, believe it or not, for the first time since college, at least. But thank you for joining today. And if you're just getting on, we're going to be beginning shortly. It is now 4:04 by my Mac, it says, and we'll give it just another minute. Nick, how many do we still have people in the waiting room? Let me see if I'm going to see if I can unmute. Well, Nick, go ahead, Nick. Can you hear Nick?
Good, and we have just about everyone in now.
You have everybody in?
Yes.
Is that what I heard? Okay, great. All right. Then I'm going to begin. This is great. Welcome everyone. This is our session, our session that we're bringing to you online. We have the opportunity today to listen to Dr. Will Linn. Dr. Will Linn is from Studio School in Los Angeles. Just to give you a little background on Dr. Linn, he chairs the general education department at Studio School in Los Angeles, where he teaches courses on myth to storytellers. Storytellers, it sounds familiar. Storytellers, we're all storytellers here in STN. We believe that's the basis of what we do. Dr. Linn has served as a radio host for the Santa Barbara News Press, Mythopia, and editor and director for Joseph Campbell Foundation, and a documentary interviewee from Memory, The Origins of Alien Great Myths. Today, Dr. Linn will share the study of myth and how it has nurtured the core skills of great storytellers, from Tolkien and Lucas, George Lucas, that is, to the teams of Marvel and Pixar, all these different production companies that we're all familiar with. This session was scheduled for the 2020 STN convention and brought to you today by Studio School. And if you're interested in more about Studio School, you can check them out. It's at studioschool.edu. So our format today, Dr. Linn is going to give his presentation, and you're going to have an opportunity to ask him questions following his presentation today. So it's going to be a great time. I'm sure you're going to have some great questions. So at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Linn. Dr. Linn, thank you for joining us.
Oh, thank you guys so much for welcoming me in. It was a wonderful time last year in Seattle, and it's awesome to see everybody adapting and figuring it out. And I know that teachers and storytellers in the audience are doing the same thing. You know, internally at our school, we're thinking to ourselves, well, what are we going to change about what we teach next fall? There will be changes. We want, the world's changing quickly. So really hats off to you guys for pulling this together and making it work in short order and online, so thank you again for having me. This talk is, well, first let me just say, I can't see anybody. I can't even see myself. So I'm kind of talking right at my own presentation. It feels a little surreal. But I'm just going to, imagine that you're all there together within 6 feet of each other. So this talk today is designed for both teachers and students. I'm going to go through some things that are some beginner lessons for myth and story, but they're also designed to kind of demonstrate some valuable ways to approach teaching myth and story. And if anybody wants materials from me, I'm happy to share them. One of the things I'm doing right now, for those of you who know who Joseph Campbell is, and I'm going to say some more about him, but I work for the Joseph Campbell Foundation as one of my roles, and they've brought me on to do their official study materials for Hero with 1,000 Faces. So anybody that's teaching Hero with 1,000 Faces or the hero's journey already, expect some shiny new materials, the first ever official materials on the hero's journey from the Joseph Campbell Foundation that I'll be putting out with them in September. So this is a couple pieces from that, a couple pieces from how I do things, but generally I want to just share that I'm very interested in teaching teachers and really exploring how this material can be simplified and introduced and inspiring and how to share it. So with that, I'll go ahead and move into our overview for the day. So what I already mentioned about delivering this for teachers and students and introducing some things that I find to be successful inspiration and some basics, some distillations. So the first section we're going to go into is storytellers studying myth. We're going to look at some of the major historical groups and movements. And I'm talking like radical, awesome movements of storytellers that have dug into myth to find superpowers and how that's worked for them. Then I'll tell you just a little bit about myth and story at Studio School. I'll introduce you to the famous hero's journey and give a bit of an introduction to how that works and what it is. And I'll even share a little bit about the COVID journey, how the hero's journey applies to this COVID adventure we're all on. And then finally, I will share some of the foundations of where that comes from, which I believe are really useful to teaching it. For example, the hero's journey, you start throwing out terms like call to adventure, crossing the threshold, return journey, and it can get very abstract. So I'm going to share a way that is just intuitive. I'm going to show you that you all already know this pattern, and that if you realize that by looking at, for example, the cycle of the sun from sunrise to noon to sunset to midnight, you already know that's easy. And if you can focus on these natural versions, these original versions of the narrative structures that became structures of myths, that became structures of mythological theories, that became structures of some of your favorite movies, getting down to that basic element of life and death and sunrise and sunset is really going to help to learn it, to remember it, and to teach it. Okay, so let's start with the Romantics. I am Frankenstein, also known as the modern Prometheus, is one of my very favorite stories of all time. Many people see it as the birth of science fiction. Though I have some other theories about how science has participated and technology has participated in our myths for as far back as we want to look, the world generally recognizes this as the big breakthrough moment in science fiction. And her husband, Percy Shelley, also wrote heavily about Prometheus. And Prometheus created creatures in a shop. And of course, later we'll get to, we won't have time to talk about it today, but this inspires characters like the Golem or Ava from Ex Machina or Ultron or Pinocchio, right? And what you're going to find is that there are all these character qualities in in Prometheus creatures that become character qualities in Frankenstein and Ultron. You hear there are no strings on me. All these references are thick when these great storytellers, they know their myths and they're bringing these qualities into them. But let me put that aside and share just a little bit about what the Romantics did and what made them so special. Well, specifically Percy and Mary Shelley. And you got to kind of dig around to find where a storyteller really shares their secrets about what they're doing. And for example, C.S. Lewis, you don't find his secrets on epic unless you're reading his Introduction to Paradise Lost, where he decides that's where I'm going to introduce how epic works. So same thing with Percy Shelley, and where he really lays it out is in his introduction to Prometheus Unbound. And in that introduction, he talks about mimesis, the mimesis of psyche and nature. And to give you an example of what he means, so what he's talking about is he's saying there are patterns in nature that mime patterns in the psyche. And that if I use nature in my poetry, I can trigger stuff in the mind that has that same pattern without people even knowing it. Okay, and so the thing is, he said, the storytellers of my time are not doing this. Maybe Shakespeare, yeah, definitely Shakespeare, maybe a couple. There are some people he really looked up to, but mostly he thought that people just didn't even know to use these secrets and these tools. And so let me give you an example. I want you to imagine for me a flower, and now imagine it blossoming. But wait, put a rubber band around that flower in your mind, and that flower's trying to blossom. It wants to blossom, but there's a rubber band blocking it. Can you feel that? Have you ever felt that way? Many of you are young, and this is a feeling that many of you are likely to have. You're ready to come into flower. You want to blossom with who you are, but there are all these things restraining and limiting and keeping you from fully blossoming. And so if I were to give you this image of a flower with a rubber band, I'm going to trigger your inner emotions and experiences that relate to this inability to blossom or this resistance to your blossoming. And this is what he did, So what about sunset? Sunset evokes death. It's the light going out and going down, right? And so instead of talking about somebody dying, you show the sunset. Or even better, when you show somebody dying, also show the sunset. And this will thicken and deepen the experience of what you're really trying to communicate. Okay, so these are the Romantics, and especially Percy and Mary Shelley, a beautiful couple, lovers. And this breakthrough in the study of mimesis and the study of the relationship between psyche and nature, the use of Prometheus to bring in a new era of science fiction, arguably the first great era of science fiction, these guys, this man and woman, this couple, are a couple of the most important figures in the history of mythic storytelling. Now I want to tell you about the Inklings. Who are the Inklings? The Inklings are people like C.S. Lewis, J.R.R. Tolkien, Charles Williams, and several others. But these J.R.R. Tolkien, C.S. Lewis are the ones that you know, and they're the two that really put the group together. And what they were trying to do was study epic for the purpose of writing epics. And I don't know about you, but when I was 17, that spoke to me. And I was like, that is the trick. We should be studying myths to write myths, studying epics to write epics. And that's what they did. And they weren't just storytellers. These two were true and serious scholars. Tolkien was a philologist, which means he studied languages. And of course, he wrote languages. And Lewis was a literary scholar. And one of the things I want to tell you that's going to, well, first let me say this. As the last couple we looked at are given credit for giving birth to the science fiction genre, these two, and especially J.R.R. Tolkien, are credited for giving birth to the fantasy genre. So we're talking about whole genres, science fiction and fantasy. Those are the biggest money-making and most viewed genres in the world. And they were born from people that decided that they were going to study myths and epics to really figure out how they could do something new and special. But Lewis wasn't always on board. In fact, originally Lewis was a traditional Enlightenment style atheist, which is surprising to those of you who know how important he is to Christians by now. And so what happened? One day he made the mistake of telling J.R.R. Tolkien, Dr. Tolkien, that he thought a tree was just a tree, some wood, some splinters and leaves and that kind of stuff. And this drove Tolkien crazy. To reduce a tree to its mere matter, to its mere substance, yeah, right, no way. So he did what any man would do when another man has really upset him. He went home and he wrote a poem. And in that poem called Mythopoeia, he talked about how a tree is not just a tree. He says that a tree has all these meanings to it. So for example, a tree reaches up into the sky and down into the earth. And so just in the mere being of a tree is a bridge between heaven and earth, between the lower realms and the upper realms. It's just there. It's just part of what a tree is. And what Tolkien's saying is that that also is in our minds. And that when I use a tree in my story, I can evoke this notion of a portal, or of a what they call in mythological terms, an axis mundi between realms. And of course, later, if any of you saw or read the Chronicles of Narnia, the first, Lion, Witch, and the Wardrobe, they go home through a tree. The tree is a portal between the two realms. And so this is to say that not only did, well, there's one more thing I need to say about what mythopoesis is. So Tolkien believed, now he was a Christian, but this applies to anybody in any religion. So he believed that, or any spiritual inclination, or even there's even a broader range that this will apply to, those of you who see nature as divine and inspiring. So what he thought was that the divine mind, the divine, whatever's on the other side of what we can't see, expresses itself in metaphorical terms through nature. And so everything in nature has all these lessons embedded in it, not based on its material reductive qualities, but in the implicit metaphors. So it's as though the divine is teaching us truth through nature and its metaphors. And whether you believe in an actual God or not, the second you start writing a story, you are a God of that world. And Tolkien was really clear on this. And I recommend this book you see in the middle, On Fairy Stories, because it gets into, it's Tolkien's only real work on how to write a myth and what he's really up to. And I'll remind you again, the only real best place to do this with Lewis, and he writes a little bit more on this stuff, but really the best is where he's doing an introduction to Paradise Lost. And it's his introduction to how epics work. Okay, so these two, you can see how it's somewhat a continuation of mimesis. We're looking at the miming patterns of nature and psyche is mimesis. And here we're looking at the metaphorical expressions of nature and the philosophical implications that they might have. Okay, so these two, and with them, the Inklings. Oh, and I'll just say, just because it's, studio school relevant, there was a movie, Tolkien, that came out, and Fox Searchlight was excited about, what we do on campus with mythology and storytelling, and they gave us 100 tickets to the premiere, and we took like 80 students and a bunch of faculty and a bunch of friends to go to the premiere of Tolkien. And when we went down there, we got down and we talked to the director afterwards and introduced the students. And he was like, "Oh my God, I can't believe you're here because you're who we made the movie for." In the movie, you may remember, or for those of you who didn't see, it was also in the trailer, that these storytellers, their whole commitment, this is a pre-Inklings thing. They had a club before when they were young, and C.S. Lewis wasn't yet a part of it. But Tolkien, their whole thing was, let's save the world with art. We can save the world with art. And I think, and I would argue that many of the messages in Tolkien's work have really done service to improving the quality of human beings and how we live in this world. And I hope that many of you who are storytellers never let that part of it go. Remember that what you're doing will shape people and influence people. They will project into your stories. They will model their lives after your stories. And so I hope that, especially right now when the world seems to need a little bit more saving than usual, I hope that you will always keep this in mind. And I hope that you'll see this as a pathway to doing that you can model the world that you want. Now, one of the things that Lewis struggled with is he got didactic. He said he started talking about how to be and making things direct. And when you're young and when you first start trying to write things that move people, that's what you do. You write your philosophy, you find ways to put your actual philosophy in words. But what Tolkien was so good about is he could transmute, he could translate his philosophy into metaphors, into stories, into visuals, so that you got his whole worldview consciously or unconsciously just right through his story. And that takes a lot of work and a lot of practice. Okay, so that's the Romantics and the Inklings. Now I should share with you Star Wars, The Hero's Journey. And I'm noticing I don't have my speaker notes, but that's okay. So famously, before we get to Star Wars, Joseph Campbell's Hero with a Thousand Faces, he wrote this book in 1949, and it was a bestseller then. It inspired Impressionist artists and musicians like Bob Dylan and Bob Weir and the Grateful Dead and Jim Morrison of the Doors, hugely influenced. So he was influencing artists and musicians right off the bat. And it was just a little bit later that Stanley Kubrick picked up the book. And when Arthur C. Clarke got stuck writing 2001: A Space Odyssey, Stanley Kubrick gave Arthur C. Clarke Here with a Thousand Faces. And I'll just point out one specific moment. You know that dun, 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 that song is called Thus Spake Zarathustra. And Thus Spake Zarathustra is a book written by Nietzsche in which he lays out a narrative pattern. And I won't have time to go into it today, but in that narrative pattern, in essence, what it is you're born a beast of burden doing what you're told to do. And then you try really hard to even do the hardest stuff to do what you're supposed to do. And then eventually in the process, you realize who you're doing it for. And it's a tyrant. It's somebody trying to control what you do. And then you become a lion and you defeat that tyrant, the dragon thou shalt. And then after that, the lion can't make a new world. And so what do you see at the end of the movie when they're playing Thus Spake Zarathustra? You see what Nietzsche laid out. It has to be a baby. The lion turns into a baby. And it's only the baby's new eyes that can see a new world. And so this was picked up by these two great storytellers through Campbell's book, which they shared, Here with a Thousand Faces. So, later you get to Star Wars, and that's the really, really, really famous one. Star Wars follows the hero's journey, and it's become a model unto itself, just following and patterning after Star Wars because it was so successful. And then you go a layer deeper and you find the pattern beneath Star Wars, at least the narrative pattern, is the hero's journey, which he learned from Joseph Campbell, who he called my Yoda. And they developed a close relationship while he was making the films, not before the first film, but Lucas says that Campbell may have been the first to watch all three back to back to back, almost a prophet of our modern day streaming environment. And so then flash forward, and it's been 70 years. I wrote an article for the Campbell Foundation, and any of you really want to see the CEOs, the Oprah Winfreys, the executives that started, Brian Chesky started Airbnb, who sees all of their adventures, every stay as a hero's journey, and that informed this bajillion-dollar company, or the CEO of Microsoft talking about rediscovering the soul of the company and using Here with a Thousand Faces. We could go on and on and on, Colbert, Obama, you name it. And there are tons of these references and uses of the hero's journey and Joseph Campbell. And in fact, the truth is that by now, he's not just informing these movies, and I'm talking every billion-dollar franchise. In fact, here we go. I've got for you here, and I think you guys can see, this is a t-shirt. This is Superman, of course. But what you'll see in the middle is a line right here, and that is a line in Kryptonian, and it's a quote from Joseph Campbell. And it's been on Superman since this new iteration of the franchise. So literally, Superman is wearing a Joseph Campbell quote. And Wonder Woman's sword literally has a Joseph Campbell quote on the sword, written in Amazonian. So, Snowden, in the movie Snowden, Joseph Gordon-Levitt literally is asked, Snowden's asked, who are your heroes? And he goes, Joseph Campbell. He saw his rescuing of this data and the delivering of it to the people as a hero's journey. So we could go on and on and on, La La Land, you name it. But the point is that it's so pervasive that he's not just informing every billion-dollar franchise with this model. it's so prevalent in Hollywood. It is so well known that now he's actually being referenced directly in movies, like 13 Hours, the Michael Bay movie, literally quoting Campbell repeatedly in the film. So, and of course, every time they do that, they reach out to the Joseph Campbell Foundation that I work for and license that and all that good stuff. So that's just a quick note on the hero's journey and Star Wars and that mythic kind of history that it has. And I will get a little bit more into where this comes from. But first, I want to mention one more film, and this is the movie Alien. This is at Sundance last year, the last live Sundance. We premiered the film Memory. I was an interviewee. I hope you guys will check it out. It's streaming. The movie, one thing that I wanted to point out is that Giger, the artist that made all the art for Alien, he pulled that art out of a place that wasn't just made up. It came from a real and deep place. He had dreams, he had nightmares, and trigger warning, I'm going to tell you what caused them. His girlfriend killed herself with his gun, and he found her in his apartment. And he went way downhill, and he did this book of art called the Necronomicon. And in it, all the paintings are coming from a deep place, from a place of his dreams. And later, serendipitously, synchronistically, eventually this art would become the foundation of the movie Alien. And so what I want to say there is that Alien is, because of this, it's more than just a movie. And I could go in, the movie goes into the deep places it comes from for Ridley Scott and all the filmmakers, Dan O'Bannon. And it's one of the things I want to point out is that dream is a very important part of the study of myth and the creation of story. Dream is the natural storytelling that we do. And if I could just simply tap into that genius that is my own inner dreamer, then writing stories would get a whole lot easier. So on one hand, we study dreams and how they work and how they can inform what we do. But on another, it's important to remember how valuable it is to let yourself become more permeable to your unconscious, because there is brilliance down there. And so one of the important things about mythic storytelling isn't just learning from dreams. It's also learning to have a relationship with your imagination and with your own depths. And when you bring that out, it comes from a special and powerful place. Okay. So what I've been trying to say is that why is it the great storytellers study myth? On one hand, it's because myths are time tested. I mean, if they lasted forever, there's got to be doing something right? And one thing that's interesting about that, and not just time tested, when we study myth, we do comparative myth. We don't want to just copy a Christian myth or just copy a Hindu myth. As a world mythologist, my PhD, I studied, can't say all, but I studied lots and lots and lots and lots of traditions. And what you start to do is you find these consistencies of patterns. You've got tricksters everywhere. You've got holy grails in every tradition. You've got creation stories everywhere. You've got floods in most stories. So why is there this consistency? And mythologists concern themselves with why and how and what this consistency is. But for storytellers, all we need to focus on is the fact that there is consistency and that there are these patterns that show up all over the world. And so when I write with these patterns, with these images, with these characters, with these narrative structures that are resonant in traditions all over the world, I can predict that my story will be resonant all over the world. And so on one hand, myths, the hero's journey and the study of myth can help a storyteller figure out how can I encode my story with my beliefs, with my philosophy, with my understanding of death, with my perceptions of the world, etc. So the storyteller has this really authentic desire to deliver an understanding and a message and a vision. And the studio executive, they want to make sure they can sell it to a really large audience. And the study of myth serves both, and it empowers both, because it gives you a way to, one, it helps you learn how to translate your ideas into story, into this language. And it's really a language. And until you understand that story has its own language, a metaphorical language, a pattern-based language that translates into characters and images and narrative patterns, then you're just simply not even speaking the language that story really takes place in. And when you learn that language and you learn its relatability, the way that it works around the world, you also empower your story to reach more people and studio executives. That's why every gajillion-dollar franchise uses Hero with a Thousand Faces, Hero's Journey. You know, the co-founder of Pixar, he says, my favorite book is Hero with a Thousand Faces, and the next one's Hero's Journey, which is about Joseph Campbell's life. And it's because on one hand, it helps them figure out how to sell gargantuan stories, but on another, it helps them figure out how to say meaningful stuff. Okay, so my conclusion here that I want to just drop a note on is myths can be studied to learn how to write stories that will reach a large audience and stand the test of time. Okay, so now, and I'm only going to go for another like 17 minutes, which means I'm going to keep this rapid pace up. So the first thing I just want to share a little bit of what do we do at Studio School that sets us apart here. It's so funny, I actually can't see my own slide, the whole slide. So I'll just say, first of all of us are storytellers. I was so moved to hear that description at the start of this talk about the student television network, that all of you are storytellers. We have dancers, we have actors, we have musical theater majors, and we have filmmakers, including screenwriters. And we are all storytellers. We exist in a giant studio where they just made Westworld and all kinds of movies and shows, and everybody in the building is a storyteller. And so it's like our Hogwarts, and at Hogwarts, everybody's a magician. Well, in our building, at our school, everyone's a storyteller. And that's something that sets us apart from, you know, large universities where you've got everybody mixed in. And I think those are wonderful and tremendous too. That's what I did and where I went. However, if you really want to be a storyteller, it's very special to enmesh yourself with a community of storytellers. And in a setting where it's happening every day. And that's very unique to us, that just you walk in and you have to walk around the setup for Westworld that day. And that's just how it goes, and that's okay. It's actually quite nice. General education, I'm the chair of general education, and we make it a point to use storytelling as a spine to work through general education. And so Gen Ed serves the rest of the departments. So we've got filmmakers, actors, dancers. The filmmakers don't need to know how to pirouette, and the dancers don't need to know what a boom is, but they all need to know what a character is, what a setting is, what an item, how to work with props and images and symbols. In narrative structure. So we use general education, which are the common set of courses to deliver common lessons on storytelling, to provide a shareable language on storytelling, and to ultimately give superpowers to our filmmakers that are not necessarily being delivered in every other program. We've made it a serious point to emphasize myth and story, which is obviously expressed just by nature of the fact that I chair this department. We have a very collaborative team, which means that we can make sure that these lessons are integrated into the rest of the departments, which is very cool. We also have some very specialized courses, intro courses and advanced courses on storytelling and mythology. We have a lab where every day, 10 hours a week, there is somebody that is trained in both mythology and story that will sit down with you. You can just come in with your ideas and your stories, and they will help you work on your scripts, but they'll also help you develop your treatments. They'll help you work on your characters. It's like you introduce this character that's this young, let's say there's a baby boy, right? So now they're going to help you look at all the baby boys in myth and what really makes baby boys, and how you can turn the idea of baby boy up to 11, all the way up, and really make your baby boy a loud baby boy. Or maybe it's a trickster, or maybe it's a dad, and they can help you see the relationship between a parent and a boss and a president and God. And they can start to show you that these are all hierarchical peaks, and they all trigger each other. So if I have issues with my boss, it might relate to my issues with a parent, right? So but you want, as a storyteller, you want to be able to do that on purpose. You want to be able to have a story about a boss that activates people's relationship with their parents. And that's how you're going to be able to reach huge audiences, because you keep your stories projectable. Okay, and we have this writer's room where the writing lab takes place, and in it is a whole set of resources on myth and storytelling, symbol dictionaries, all kinds of motif indexes, and just good old-fashioned books on screenwriting and storytelling. We also have a very unique set of mythologists and story experts, PhD mythologists, a whole set of them that work in the writer's room and teach courses. We have story experts who are major authors in the space, especially those that write with Michael Wiese, which is the leading, they were with me in this presentation last year. And Michael Wiese is the leading publisher of books on film, especially those on myth and storytelling, but really all books on film. And they're an example of one of our many myth and story allies. We've got lots of organizations and entities out there, PhD programs, publishers, you name it, and they recognize us as an important node in the discussion of myth and story, and so they come and support us in all kinds of ways. We've hosted summits and events and that kind of thing. And I also want to point out, we have a tremendous student club, a storytellers union that the students have started. Checking my time. Whoo! Okay, so I'm going to skip this slide, and we already talked about him. And here's the hero's journey, and I'm going to rush through it because I want to get to a couple more things. Common day. The world starts with the world as it is. Common day. Something happens. You're called to adventure. You meet some helper. Then you've got to cross the threshold. I'm going to go on this journey, go into another world. And the hero's journey is very much about a known world and another world, a world of adventure. Think of it as day and night. And then you're going to go on this road of trials and all kinds of tests, and you're going to meet people and helpers, and there's going to be some big old ordeal. Maybe it's in the Death Star, and you've got to save Leia, and then you're going to have your magic flight. You've got to escape. You think of E.T. and think of them on the bicycles. They got to escape. Or think of them in the Millennium Falcon. They've got to escape. And then you return home, and then you have this major confrontation, and you deliver the insight and the item that you have found on the journey to save the world. So this is just a model. I'm going to skip it, but this is a model where I've distilled and updated that what you just saw is a little 70 years old and not really designed for teaching. And I'm going to rush through this. So how about Star Wars? Luke is at home. The Death Star exists. The droids come, a kind of a disruption in his world. Leia calls, "Help me, Obi-Wan Kenobi, you're my only hope." And then Obi-Wan says, "Come with me, Luke." And he's like, "No way, I can't leave." So that's a very common response. The refusal of the call is one of the kind of defining obvious, somebody's working with the hero's journey probably if they have a, quote, reluctant hero. And then you meet your mentor, your aide, right? And you've probably met him all throughout the first act. And this is Obi-Wan, this is Morpheus, etc. And then you cross the threshold. This is Alice down the rabbit hole. This is through the wardrobe. This is through the hourglass. And this is, in this case, hyperspace, leaving the planet, doing this really, these are many people's favorite sequences where you cross a threshold and you have really cool animated version of it. So don't miss that cool opportunity. When your character goes for that journey and leaves, make sure that's a cool moment. Make sure they're going down a rabbit hole or going through hyperspace. And then once you're in the other world, what happens when you jump into a deep, cold pool? At first, you're overwhelmed, right? And they're in deep space. And then you start training and developing. And this is Luke's force training. I'm not going to get into the midpoint or the via negativa too much, but eventually their big ordeal is in the Death Star, the trash compactor, the team is breaking down, Obi-Wan dies, but also Leia is rescued and they have the plans. Now they're going to escape. And after the escape transitions into a plan of attack. And then they're going to deliver what they've learned, Luke's heroism, Luke's force. There's going to be a kind of resurrection moment that is Obi-Wan speaking to him. And ultimately, they're going to deliver the elixir, in this case, which is are these laser blasts to explode the Death Star. Now we've got a new world, a redeemed wasteland, a world without a Death Star, a world without that level of oppression, and we've got a new world. But what about COVID? And I realize, by the way, I'm just not going to get through the final section of this, and that's okay. What about COVID? There's the world before COVID. There's our status quo. And then there are the first cases, that incident, that inciting incident. And then we start hearing the news and we're called to do something about it. But remember, reluctance, resistance, denial. I don't know. I don't believe it. This is common, right? Just like the hero's journey. And then you meet your guides. And of course, Fauci would be an example of one of our Obi-Wans right now, who we listen to and we believe. And ultimately that resistance gives way to a commitment, and we decide, okay, I guess we're going to have to go on this journey. We're going to cross a threshold and we're going to go into another world. And what is that other world? That other world is often an inner world. The hero's journey often distinguishes between an outer world and an inner world. So the world of dream, the inner space, and this normal reality we interact in. And in this case, the threshold we've crossed is a literal threshold that is a door. That's what, the frame around a door, you call it threshold. And so we've crossed the threshold into our homes, and we will be in our homes until we exit at the end. And this will be our other world, our inner world, literally in our homes and going into ourselves. And at first we're overwhelmed. How do we do this? Are we going to be able to put on a student television network event at all? But then you start to figure it out. And you do learn new ways, and we have learned new ways. And we're doing all this, we're doing what we're doing now. And also while we're home, we start doing we're doing some inner work. I think all of us are. And we start looking in. And things start to get worse though at this time. And they're getting worse and worse and worse. The tractor beam is pulling you into the Death Star. This is no good. And we know that the nadir, which is the bottom of the journey, the worst part of the journey, that's going to be the peak that we're all afraid of, that we all see coming. And it's going to be a bigger peak for the rest of the world when we don't just look at it in US terms. And then after that peak, we're going to start going back to work. We're already talking about it. But are we going to just go back to how we were? Are we going to go back to the level of pollution? Are we going to go back to the level of travel and the requirement to come into the office? Or are we going to keep having departmental meetings through Skype? Are we going to keep doing some of this stuff? Are we going to pollute less? This is the time, the journey, the return journey, where it's really hard to not just regress and go back to who you were and how you were. And this is the challenge for the hero too. They've changed and it's so easy to regress. This is a model for addiction too, right? So with an nadir, you've made this choice. I'm going to change. But then it's hard to keep the change. Okay. And then, finally, we're going to exit our homes and hopefully we do get back to a normal world, but hopefully it's a new world that we do differently. And so, I'll just share this part because we won't get through all of it. Where did this pattern come from? Where did Campbell find this pattern that somehow relates to the COVID journey and Star Wars and at the same time and many of your life adventures and that kind of thing? Well, he found the pattern by looking at thousands of myths and distilling a consistency of that pattern. But where did myths get this pattern? Why are they so consistent? Well, because myths got their patterns from nature and from psyche and from life. So they pattern their journey after life and death. They patterned the journeys and myths after the seasons, Persephone and the seasons, right? Or the sunset and sunrise is the foundation of Osiris's journey. So what I am sad we won't really get into is these basics. And I'm going to skim through the slideshow so that anybody wants to slow it down and pause it, they're welcome to do that. And part of the reason it's so valuable to get down to that level of nature and sunrise and sunset is because what I just went through, it can go in one ear and out the other. How can I even remember Call to Adventure or whatever it is, right? How can you, and then what about the millions of models that people are trying to teach me? There are all these different things, right? Well, just get down to the basics. And if you hold on to the basics, sunrise, sunset, midnight, then you can always orient yourself. They're easy to learn. You already know them. Okay. So just give you an example, right? So light goes from noon to sunset to midnight to sunrise. This is maximum light going down to minimum light. Full moon to new moon, maximum light down to minimum light. Summer solstice, right? Maximum light down to minimum light, right? And you see how they all line up. And you see how midnight is to the new moon is to winter solstice, just like high noon is like the full moon is like the summer solstice. This is lining them all up with maximum and minimum light. And what we won't have time to go into is how myths follow this pattern. And of course, down at the bottom, you have the one of my favorite stories is the decapitation of the Minotaur in the Labyrinth by Theseus. And the decapitation of the Minotaur, his horns are the horns of the moon. And so the decapitation of the Minotaur is the cutting off, is the going dark of the moon. This is a story that expresses the process of the new moon. Okay. And we won't get to go through these, but these are another version of these, right? Vitality, maximum and minimum vitality in form of waking up, sexuality, and being alive. And they line up too. So, and this is a shame we won't do the riddle of the Sphinx, but here you see the riddle of the Sphinx following this pattern. You see Orion following this pattern. You see Oedipus, and this is just a whole bunch of these eyes going out at sunset and coming back at sunrise. These night sea journeys where a baby goes into a basket or something's put into a trunk. It goes through the water and it comes out on the other side. Frobenius, this great mythologist, suggests that this is a mimesis of the sunset, the sun traveling through the water and coming back at sunrise. Here's more on the Osiris myth, and you can see how he relates to the sunset and sunrise, the annual year and the flood, death and resurrection. And what you're seeing is this mixing of human cycles of life with natural cycles. So here's Inanna, right? This is the life and death cycle and the lunar cycle. You see that little crescent moon above her head at the bottom, right? Just like we were talking about with the horns of the Minotaur. But this is also the story of pregnancy. When she comes back from the underworld, the world of the dead, she also comes back with a baby. She's giving birth on her way back. And so we see this mixing of human cycles with natural cycles. And Persephone is probably the famous example, the seasons miming her journey to the underworld and her return, right? But it's also the story of her pregnancy, which is an encoded piece. It's also the story of marriage. It's the story of femininity. It's the story of life and death. So you see this mixing of human cycles with natural cycles, and of course Christ with sunset and sunrise, and we won't have time to unpack the relationship with the moon there. So these myths inform your favorite stories. Narrative structure is just the tip of the iceberg. We also want to make images, characters, and settings resonate with human depths and global audiences. Myths give superpowers to storytellers. Studio School leads myth and story training. For more teaching materials, write to me. There's my email address. And for more myth, you can visit my website, mythosophia.net. Thank you. And we're going to shift to Q&A now. And this link right here, if you're interested in more in Studio School, I'll leave that up and you can find more on Studio School there. So I'll conclude there. I hope that you all kept up with the rush and look forward to your questions.
Thank you so much, Dr. Linn. That was amazing. And yeah, hear the silent applause going across. I realize how little I really know about storytelling just by listening to you. It's just amazing how much content, what we can do to deepen our stories. And there is so much. I'm going to, I want to see that I can actually see our participants. Here we go. Now, I want to kind of remind people that just before we open it up to questions for Dr. Linn, we have some regular rules that we normally put up for everyone. And that is, one, I'll go through them real quick. With your name in your screen, let us know who you are. So as we call on you and as we're looking for a name, you're going to use the raise your hand piece, but let us know who you are, your first name, your last initial, that's fine. School and state is great. Cameras, they help us feel connected. It's not required. It's not mandatory that we see you. And we're going to keep you muted until you're called upon. So we have the ability here to actually keep you on mute. And when we introduce you, wait for that. If you have a question, we're going to try and get through everybody. I'm sure there's quite a few questions that we will have. That was quite a bit of content. So use the raise your hand feature on the side. And then we're going to try to stick to the question at hand. And then, of course, most importantly, smile. You're on camera. All right. So, at this time, we're going to open it up to questions. If anybody has questions, you can use the raise your hand feature. I'm going to start. There was so much, and at Studio School and Dr. Linn, with Studio School, I mean, I may be a young filmmaker, and I know we have a lot of young filmmakers here with us, and they may have a concept, an idea, and you've gone through and kind of tipped the iceberg on some of these things to be able to see how well you can actually strengthen that story. Is there any quick ways that we might be able to we have a concept and we want to strengthen that story idea, obviously myth, but is there maybe a quick tip that you might be able to throw out to some of our young filmmakers?
Yeah, definitely. First of all, a lot of what I just went through, some people find to be more useful before they start writing and then after they finish the draft. And then after you finish that draft, go look at the schematics of the hero's journey and see if your story feels like it fits that. And if you feel inspiration where you might be able to make it better by looking at that. So I think that a lot of people get value out of that. The other thing I would say is there an important image in your story? Maybe a antidote, or maybe a sword, or maybe a cup, or maybe a drug, or whatever it is. Whatever that is, if you find that there's something really relevant, really recurring, and really central to your story, a staff or something like that, or makeup, look up makeup. Look up makeup as a symbol and look and find, oh my gosh, there's a lot to do here. I find makeup goes back to Egypt, and it's, used for X, Y, Z, P, Q. And then it's not about like taking that into your story and kind of shoehorning anything in. It's all about inspiration. Mythic storytelling is never about telling you how to do something. It's always about inspiring you with ideas, with, oh, I can make this makeup even more relevant to the audience and unforgettable if I add this detail that's always there every time makeup's used all over the world in stories, Or if I have this trickstery character, and if I give him, or her some kind of ears like a bunny, then you like Donnie Darko or Bugs Bunny. Why are there always these bunny tricksters? Maybe I just want a tattoo on my character to make sure that I'm activating that image that's so associated with tricksters, so that my character isn't just a trickster, but actually evokes the deepest qualities of trickster that shows up in our dreams and shows up for all of us in multiple stories. So the main thing is what we call amplifying. Just identify what's important to your story and then look at what it means metaphorically. And you don't have to look up a dictionary. Like a ceiling, you know what that means. A floor, metaphorically, you know what that means. And I like to say that you don't need a symbol dictionary. You just need to start developing a metaphorical relationship with things.
I'm sure there's movies out there that you go to the movie. So say you go to the movies, Dr. Linn, and you're interested in this movie. But have you been there in the movie theater and gone, I know exactly how this is going to end?
Yeah, for sure. Yes. But that's what I'll say is what the midpoint is really for, which is not really necessarily in the hero's journey, but it's in later developments of the hero's journey. The midpoint's a really cool thing. The midpoint is where everything's building towards like, this is what it's going to be. And then Alderaan's exploded and we're not actually going to get Leia at Alderaan, right? So the midpoint is where, never-ending story, right? He thinks he's going to get to this turtle that's going to give him the answer, and the turtle's like, nope, other side of the world. The midpoint's cool because that can really delay certainty of what's going to happen. But if you do understand the structure, you know what the conclusion is going to be just by looking at the inciting incident. To some extent, the abstract version of it. But I will tell you that old stories, the best and biggest stories, weren't mysteries. Anybody that heard the story of the Odyssey, they already knew the story when they heard it. And so I love Nolan movies. He's probably one of my absolute favorites. But he very much relies on the experience of not knowing what's going to happen and twisting and surprising, which is important for a modern audience. But remember, the best stories got to be the best with people already knowing what was going to happen. Cool to see everybody. Now I have a screen where I can see us all. Thank you.
we do have a couple questions here. I want to ask you this one before I turn it over to everybody. But if you would like to use the raise your hand app feature on the screen, please do so, and we'll call upon you. But is there a format that you find that is probably overused?
Yeah, I mean, I would say the hero's journey does become overused and it needs revivified. And actually, I've been working with Chris Vogler, who's putting out his 25th anniversary edition of his book this year. And, you know, I'm excited to be writing these materials for the Joseph Campbell Foundation because people are just missing a lot of the most important stuff. They're leaving out a lot of important stuff. So, for example, you should not be able to get through the hero journey without that inner hero. I am the hero. I will save the world. That attitude that the character often starts with, if a character gets through the story and still has that attitude and they're just more inflated and more full of themselves as a result of completing that journey, that's damaging to our world. And there's a lot of that, actually. There is a lot of use of the hero's journey where they want to keep things happy and uppity, and so they just don't have that real ego death, that real deconstruction that a real hero goes through. And by the way, to you teenagers who are going through that, remember it's a journey and it's a process. And if you're going through some really dark times, probably valuable.
Good stuff. All right, I'm going to throw it over to Addie Green. Go ahead, Addie. Oh, I got to unmute you. Hold on 1 second. Go ahead now.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you so much, Will. I agree with Eric here that I feel like I know very little about storytelling now after seeing everything that you presented, but I'm very interested. And it makes me ask the question, did you have a defining moment in your life that led you to this path? Or was it something that was always sort of an interest to you even early on?
Thanks for asking that. I would say that it's kind of like right now with this whole COVID thing, we were already going online. We already had Zoom technology. We were already, you know, working more from home, but all of a sudden now we have an inflection point and we're leaping. And so there was a moment for me, and it only continued and was a leap in the directions I was already going. So I was interested in Tolkien. I was interested in storytelling. I didn't know why or how or whatever. But yeah, then I had philosophy class and I studied Descartes, who convinced me I didn't know anything. And then I studied Camus, who convinced me that I had no purpose to even lift a finger to do anything. And so together they convinced me that I had no idea what to do. And it got to the point where I couldn't shower, shave, or do my homework, that's for sure. And but that was a dark phase for me. And I had seizures. And I had sleep paralysis, and I had nystagmus, which is where your eyes go back and forth because of this crazy inner ear thing. And all of them happened together, all three of those spells at once. And it sucked, and it was bad, but it really, I learned so much. I learned relationships with myself, developed relationships with myself, and ultimately came out of that knowing what I really wanted to do, which is be a philosopher. And being a storyteller, to me, is an extension of being a philosopher, because it is a modality for philosophy that extends beyond the limited scope of Western thought. And it's also a modality of philosophy that can reach a significantly larger audience.
Awesome, thank you. I have another fun, quick question for you. Is there a story, I know you mentioned Star Wars, you mentioned Narnia and everything. Is there one story that really resonates with you if you had to pick a favorite out of all the stories that are out there?
Oh man, well,
it's hard. It's like asking an actor their favorite movie, but
you know what? I can't get around it. It's just the best movie ever made. The Matrix.
Oh, okay.
It's so dang good. You know, it's so you watch that movie and there is so little out there that brings that level of philosophy and that level of insight and that level of spiritual training. It's just fantastic. And it follows the hero's journey. The Wachowskis talk about it, you know, how much they're informed by the hero's journey and all that good stuff. So that one's excellent.
Great.
And the one other one I'd add with that, I wouldn't necessarily say it's my number two, but on that wavelength of stories that really encode a lot of philosophy, a little known story called The Fountain.
Oh yeah, Ayn Rand, love it. Yeah.
No, oh, sorry. That one is a different fountain. Sorry, I meant to say, isn't it called the one by what's his name, who did Black Swan and those.
Oh, Aronofsky.
Aronofsky, yes.
Yeah. Oh, okay. I don't know that. I'll have to check that out.
Fantastic film, really impressive for sure.
Okay. Well, thank you so much. Thank you for everything. Love it.
Oh, definitely.
Okay, we have a question now from Larissa Schaefer. Go ahead, Larissa. Tell us where you're from first.
Hi, I'm a junior from Hempfield High School, and I'm from Pennsylvania. And I was wondering, what are some tips or exercises that newer storytellers can practice to like keep up with just like being used to like telling stories and stuff?
Well, I think that one of the big breakthroughs in science has been the accelerated ability to model. And now instead of having to build a $1 billion plant to model something, we can model things really fast. They're modeling examples of nuclear fusion in a truck now, right? And so what I want to suggest is that the more you iterate your models, the more times you model a story, the more you're going to learn it. And so, write your big 90-page script, but also do outlines of a story over and over and over. Imagine 50 stories, 100 stories, And I'm trying to remember the comedian who pointed to George Carlin, who said that, before I heard George Carlin say something, famous comedian, I spent forever on one act and one joke. And I spent year to get that one act sorted out, years. But George Carlin said that he writes an act every week or something like that, right? And he just forces it out of himself to do it over and over and over and over. And that actually was the breakthrough for that comedian to start doing that. So iterate, tell 1 million stories over and over and over. Have your one special story that you're working on forever, but tell a ton of them. And do it in outline form, in treatment form, in these smaller opportunities to model. Write a fairy tale. And one thing you learn is that, look, a fairy tale can be extended into a trilogy, or a trilogy can be collapsed into a fairy tale. And when you start to recognize that, you start to see that you can model huge stories, even with little iterations. And the more experience you get doing that, I think the better your relationship will get. And also, watch stories and analyze them and model them. Thanks for that question, Larissa.
Thanks, Larissa. That's so true. I think that's always awesome. You can always emulate and work off of other stories. That's a great tip. I'm going to throw it over to Christopher Schwalm. Tell us where you're from, Christopher.
Hi, Chris Schwalm from Cedar Crest High School, Lebanon, Pennsylvania, video production teacher. Currently in Seattle, though, on a sabbatical. I've got a question. In our classes with, working with high school students to develop stories, we often run into barriers in terms of logistics, limitations in set, props, equipment, experience. So what tips can you give to a high school student to apply to enrich their stories, make them more meaningful about the more mundane everyday topics that relate to and are informed by their experiences, their limited experiences?
Great question. There are a lot of misconceptions that the hero's journey and these mythic models are only for giant science fiction fantasy stuff, right? But the truth is that they actually can also show you how to deepen even normal mundane stories, even a romance, right? So, in a romance story, there's life before the girlfriend or the boyfriend or whoever it is, right? And then there's this disruptive first time you meet them, and then this calling to be with them, and we can keep going through it. But the point is that you can use these models even in very mundane stories set in the real world, and they elevate those stories. And then let's say that you can now, we've been talking about narrative structure a lot of this time, but you can also now layer in images and characters. So let's say that this is visual language is everything, right? So instead of saying yes, how about a toast? Or if you there's thresholds to cross too in a normal, how about in a romance, sticking with that, right? Would you like to come inside? That's a heck of a threshold, right? A real threshold. So I would say I would say that actually I could never make myself write mundane stories set in the real world until I figured out how I could encode them with elevated concepts and qualities by using these narrative structures and by bringing imagery and symbols. Instead of having to have an alligator in the story, I can now have an alligator tattoo or an alligator toy in the background at that crucial moment to evoke that symbol that I'm looking for.
Good. Yeah, great. Thank you.
Thanks. Yeah.
Was that in relationship to Hook or Peter Pan?
Probably. I'm thinking, here's my just because you said that, here's my childhood hero.
Oh, there he is, the Lost Boy himself.
Uh-huh.
Awesome. We have another question from Broden. Broden, go ahead, Broden.
Hey,
Can you hear me?
Yes, we
Yes,
can.
you can.
All right. So what led you to doing what you do now? Like what made you do this?
Great question. Yeah, I guess, truthfully, if I get all the way down to it, when I was in that philosophical deconstruction mode and I couldn't see any purpose or any understanding, ultimately I had this kind of big moment just happened, and ultimately I came to believe that, and this is not something I get into in a classroom, but since you asked, I believe that love is the ultimate kind of purpose to serve, and that understanding love is then the secondary, purpose in order to live love, and then also spreading and sharing and growing love. And so ultimately I came to believe that the best way to do that was to live an examined life by being a philosopher, and to share that philosophy with the world by being a storyteller. And then also at the same time, even better, I mean, Joseph Campbell, he wrote some stories that nobody read, but he designed a pattern that's informing every story, not every, but most big Hollywood stories. And so how could I turn down an opportunity? I do write my own stories, but it's also a privilege to inspire others who can then take that forward and communicate powerfully through their stories and express their philosophies. It's kind of a multiplier effect. And so that's what ultimately led me into teaching, which wasn't my original plan. It was just to tell stories. But this cool opportunity at Studio School came up, a brand new school. And, we're really proud. Within 5 years, we were ranked top 50 film school internationally by Variety. Definitely the only school that's that young that did it. So it was a really hot and fun opportunity to do something very special. And I will take the opportunity to say, I just read seniors' essays, their last essay that they wrote right now during all this. And I thought I was preparing them to be storytellers, but apparently teaching them story prepared them to navigate this situation, to see it as part of a process, as part of a story, and to find hope and to believe we're going somewhere with all this. And it moved me tremendously to see that these students aren't just prepared to be excellent storytellers, but they're prepared to take on the challenges of life. So thank you for that question. You got me to go all the way into the very depths of myself. Thank you, Broden.
You're welcome. Thanks.
Okay, cool. We have a couple more questions. These are some great questions, though. I feel we're getting some great listeners here. And as we're doing this, I'm seeing some mythical creatures even across the screens here. Let's throw it over to Cole W. Go ahead, Cole.
Hello. First of all, I want to just thank everyone that made this happen. Cause can you hear me?
Yes,
yeah,
we can.
Because I've been writing down notes and everything. It's been very useful. But when I'm kind of writing down stories, sometimes I'll sit back and think oh, I've kind of seen this before, and I realize I'm maybe drawing inspiration from somewhere or kind of copying. So where do you kind of draw the line between taking inspiration from a story and realizing you're copying from it pretty much?
Well, first of all, I would say there's a lot more copying going on than I think we even realize. So it doesn't disqualify success to do that. But I'd also say that I think that the real solution to this is to go deeper. You know, so a lot of people are being inspired by the last 5 years of movies or the last 20 years of movies or film history. But how about you expand that into the most powerful stories of all of human history, into stories from all over the world, into stories in multiple mediums? And I promise you, if you do that, your copying will become so sophisticated and so rich and so deep that it will be new. It will be totally new. And so, you know, I think the real solution is just drill that well deeper.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for that question.
The storyline really is like what we remember, what we take away from it. We go to see a movie or something. It's the storyline we remember. Not sometimes we remember the character. We remember the lines, as I always repeat out the lines. It's amazing. But you know, it's funny. We were my kids and I. They hadn't seen the movie Avatar. We were watching that just the other day, and I was reminded that Avatar, well, yeah, it's the same plot as Dances with Wolves, except it's just like kind of a little bit more futuristic.
And
So
Fern Gully.
yeah, same thing. Exactly. Yeah, right. So it's interesting, Cole, as you actually were talking about that. When do you know that you're actually stepping over the line? When you copy, and when you actually going on to new thing, your own creativity? We have another question here from Carter Kent. Carter, go
Hey,
ahead.
Carter.
Oh, I muted him, and then let's see. There we go. Go ahead, Carter.
Okay, cool. I just had a question. So when you're writing a story and writing your character, and you get to a point where you're not sure where you can take them, like how they should develop, what's a good way to get through that? To sort of like, yeah.
Yeah, good question. I would say that, you know, first of all, I would say that character arc is essential, right? And that's kind of the simplest of all stories is A to B, right? So, you know, you look at a character, I like the movie Equilibrium for this. This is a guy, this is Christian Bale. Christian Bale starts out an agent of the system. He is an enforcer of a dystopia. And at the end, he's the one who brings an end to the dystopia. It's like a flip, right? And this is really what you want with most characters, is almost a complete inversion. And why? Because this character is your opportunity to communicate what you believe. And so what I tend to do is I tend to make my character flaws, the most important characters have the flaws that I'm the most critical of in society. And then I design a path for them to change, because I know that society can then project into that path and change with that character unconsciously. And so, you know, I would say, and by the way, when you start stretching this character into 7 seasons or 10 movies, it can get really challenging. You know, all of a sudden characters have flipped so many times and gone so many directions. I really am not, I get lost in that too. But in a simple arc and a simple narrative, you know, I think what's really good is get philosophical with it. You know, first follow your intuition. This is a character I feel I love and I like, but also think about who you are as an artist and what you want to say, and how can you set up the arc of that character to be an arc from the problems in the world to the solutions you want to see, and how can you march them right through that transformation so that your audience might follow along and unconsciously become the change you want to see in the world too. I hope that gives you enough answer.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. You know, I had a question there, Dr. Linn. You know, we were talking about character development, and I think a lot of our students have invested time in writing short films, not necessarily the long series or the, you know, even a 2-hour feature film. As far as character building, how can you do that in such a short time in a short film? Is it possible to really get into depth on a character?
Well, on one level, you know, there is a real limitation in how much you can do. And another thing that a lot of people say is that you shouldn't try to necessarily worry about getting through all 3 acts in a short. There are different philosophies on that. It works both ways. A lot of times it's too much to try and do, but a lot of times the very best shorts actually do pull off a little bit of an arc. I would say that with limited time, condensing the expression of your character becomes even more important. So how can I communicate who this character is quicker, right? And that means I need to use every detail I've got, you know, from their posture to the way they breathe, to the clothes they wear. That's easy. But then also, you know, is there some kind of image that they're associated with? What do they carry? What do they wear? You know, every single detail, you need to take advantage of your much more limited opportunities to develop your character quickly, because the truth is, we all like a good plot, but characters, if you got to hook with your character, people have got to want, you know, to be interested in your character right off the bat. So, you know, it's a really hard, there's no easy answer to that. It's challenging. I would also say, know the heck out of your character. Know that character so well by the time you're laying it out. And by the way, sometimes the best pre-writing is a draft, you know, is just trying to write it, you know. So I'm not saying you need to do a million things before you start writing. Sometimes that is a great place to start. But if you're going to be able to condense and express character at that extreme level, you're going to have to know that character really well, and you're going to have to use every dimension you possibly can to communicate the qualities of that character quickly.
Thank you. Thank you. I think that helps with a lot of our young filmmakers.
Mm-hmm.
We're getting down to the end of our questions, but I did want to ask about studio school again. You guys take a lot of students in. If students wanted to know more about studio school, or they had a specific question, is there?
Yeah, definitely. You know, one is, can you guys still see my screen where it has that website on it?
Not right now.
That's one thing. So, but the other is, I'll share my screen really quickly. But the other is, you know what, like, there are not too many people on this call to give you my email address, and I can connect you too. You know, my email address is wlinn@studioschool.edu. But I know that the rest of the team would also love for you to go through, you know, more institutionalized channels. But I'm happy to just connect with you guys and put you through that. So let me share my screen so you can see that website right now. Is that working? Can you see that?
We are seeing your presentation right now.
There we go. So bit.ly/STN Zoom. I believe that will show you where you can learn more about the school. Of course, you can go to studioschool.edu. Spelling's pretty straightforward. But again, you know, and by the way, if any teachers are listening and that if they would like any of the schematics or any learning materials, or even an advanced early editions of what we're going to come out with through the Joseph Campbell Foundation, I'd be more than happy to share those if anybody wants to reach out to me or follow this link. And I should also ask, you know, just if Addie wants to add anything to that.
Oh, I think we have to unmute Addie. Let's see. I don't know if I can do that. There we go. Where are you, Addie? Here we
Hi,
go.
guys.
Go ahead, Addie.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you guys so much for being here, and thank you, Will, and thank you, STN. They've been wonderful hosts. I am the manager of the recruitment team at Studio School, and I've been with Studio School since the very beginning, so I'm honored to have seen it grow. It's truly been a blessing for me. I go and I attend these events, and I try to find young filmmakers, dancers, actors across the board to bring them to our school and to join our community here, our community of storytellers, as Will mentioned. So if anybody has any questions, no matter what age you are, we do have a summer program that's for 13 years old and up. So if you are on the younger side and you're not yet thinking about college, I'm happy to let you know about our summer program. That's a perfect introduction into what our college eventually will become.
And I teach that too, by the way.
What's that?
And I teach in the summer program.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, and it's wonderful. And in the summer program, it's 3 weeks. And in 3 weeks, you get to create 3 films that you get to keep for yourself, not watermarked, entirely yours. And you get to have the experience of working on a production lot and writing and holding a camera and directing and hanging lights, editing, and it's entirely yours. So you'll be watching that film from a completely different lens. It's beautiful. And even if you're interested in being in front of the camera, you can try that out. And if you don't like it, at least you tried. I think at some point, every filmmaker has that experience. It's great. But if you are interested in our college program, if you're maybe a sophomore, junior, or older, definitely get in touch with us. That link is a link that goes directly to our recruitment and admissions team. So they will contact you whether you're more comfortable with email or phone, or it doesn't matter. Put in whatever information you're comfortable with so that we can contact you and give you more information and kind of lead you in the right direction. And I will end on this. Since you guys are all visual people, as informative and wonderful as our website is, we also have incredible content on all of our social media platforms. So if you wanted to just get a little bit of a taste of what a student filmmaker does and the quality of production of the work that we do here, check us out. We are Studio School L7, like our logo, like a film frame, on all platforms. It's a great way. We have a lot of updated content on our YouTube page, on our Instagram story. Instagram story is actually unedited content, so it's raw, daily. When we are on campus, again, you'll see, exactly what it's like to be, a day in the life of a student. So yeah, thank you very much. They just did a chat to everybody. That's our handle.
And let
so
me
thank
add
you
to that.
Go ahead.
I was just going to say, some of you are going to come to LA. You're going to want to either do a studio tour, you're going to want to check out a bunch of schools in LA, film schools, that kind of thing. Come to our campus. It's a combination of a studio tour and a school tour. It's, just come do the studio tour if that's what you want. We'll show you where It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia shot their, pilot, or whatever you want, but really seeing is believing with this campus. And I definitely encourage, and any teachers that, are part of leading those kinds of trips, we can always put together some more talks and that kind of stuff. So come to campus.
Yes, good idea. And then also I'll add one more thing. When it does come time to apply, I think that a lot of you filmmakers will be really happy with the application process. We ask for 3 digital pieces. So it can be a narrative, it can be a doc. It's honestly anything that's more than a minute long, that's a moving picture, is what we accept. So a lot of times by your senior year, you already have created 3. So really applying to our school is uploading what you've already done. So I know application sounds daunting, but excuse me, we actually have made it quite a fun process. And you do have an admissions coach that helps you through the entire process too. So don't be afraid of applying. It's actually pretty fun. Dare I say that word?
Oh, and note too, in that process, you ask to meet the film chair. Elric's wonderful. One of the leading, he has like the leading podcast on horror. If you're into that kind of thing, he does it for Blumhouse. He does the podcast for Quentin Tarantino. Great, cool guy. So definitely, we work very closely. So also, reach out and connect with him if you're in that process.
Awesome. Do we have time for one more question? I see one more hand raised.
I do.
Okay. We'll do this one, and then we'll adjourn. So we'll open up to Michelle Taylor. Michelle, are you there?
Yeah, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Hi,
Yes.
Michelle.
Hi. Sorry, I don't have a video camera on my desktop, but what you were speaking about before is trying to convey as much about the characters and what they're like as quickly and as efficiently as possible. And I was just wondering, like, what type of like editing techniques do you find like the use of like narration or like a lot of close-up expression shots? Like what kind of like editing techniques can help aid with that? Because I feel like you can even convey more information about a character through the editing process as well as like in the story itself. And I'm wondering if you knew anything about that.
Well, great question, and I'll add the little bit I can, but I'll also use this as a chance to say this is exactly where the general education department fits hand in glove with the film department, and that's the kind of thing that you're going to learn more from the film classes and in the film department. When it comes down to the real technique and the real craft of it, that's where they're going to pick up the torch for you. That having been said, yeah, you're 100%, correct. You can definitely bring out a lot with the editing techniques and the aesthetics and the style. And that's actually Elric's specialty, is aesthetics. So I better not say anything that he'd disagree with. But I find that narration is something that the main thing. I actually would not encourage a young person to use narration because you first need to learn how to speak visually and through action and through expression. And when you're using narration early on in your development process, you're normally relying on it as a crutch to do too much of the storytelling for you. And that becomes what they call expository. It can take you out of the story. And so it's almost like, Mr. Miyagi style, wax on, wax off. You just need to train, and so I do believe that people do great narration. Some people say it's a rule, just never, ever do it. No, it can be done, and it can be done very, very, very well. However, there's a reason why it's not the best place to start, because you need to learn, if you're going to succeed as a storyteller, as a filmmaker, your first language is visual. And you don't want to hide behind dialogue. You don't want to hide behind narration. Dialogue and narration should only confirm what the story is already expressing, and add some nuance and richness to it. I probably am better at speaking to narration than actual camera techniques and editing. But I will say we've got some pretty wonderful editing labs and editing teachers and camera specialists and cinematographers. All of our professors are working, and that's part of our core strategy as a school. We believe that the industry is changing so fast and so much that we don't want to build our core team around people that have retired from the profession. And, I'm not going to point fingers or name names, but that is a lot of the departments out there. And there's a lot of value from that approach. Our strategy is to work with people that are very active and right in the middle of their careers, which means, we're scheduling in a studio, we're scheduling with professionals. Scheduling is a challenge for us, but we do that work because we believe in that model of making sure that, editing techniques evolve quickly. We want you to be with somebody who is learning them right now. And same, cameras. Oh my gosh, how many roads we've gone down trying to make sure our students can have access to virtual reality or whatever the new mediums are going to be. So, and surprise, actually, the iPhone or the camera phone has become one of the main ones. I hope you're all figuring out this new TikTok universe in this COVID reality. Maybe the new low budget films are just social media content. So, but thank you for that question, because truthfully, it exposes my limitation, and that is one of them. And that's why we work together as a team and a tribe to make sure we give a real holistic education.
Thank you, Michelle. We're going to close it up here. Before we do, Addie, I'm going to ask you just so that you could just about this Google link. Can you kind of just walk us through that?
Yes, absolutely. So the link is bit.ly/STN Zoom. The STN it is case sensitive. The STN is all capital, and Zoom, the word Zoom, is all lowercase. So when you follow that link, you'll find yourself inside of a Google Doc, and it'll just ask you a few questions. We want to just make sure you differentiate if you're an educator or if you're a student, and you'll see the options there. And then it'll just give you the option to enter in your information so that we can keep in touch with you and let you guys know all of the cool things that we have coming up. And you can get in touch with our team. So as Will mentioned, if you do want to, come visit the school and do a studio lot tour, you're certainly able to do that.
on that note, filmmakers, it is cool to go to school with dancers and actors and musical theater majors. It makes you're like in a little micro Hollywood with all of the different, pieces of it. And so also if you're looking through that content, if you're checking out the school, take the time to look at the other programs that might not even be for you, because that's going to be who you're with.
So awesome. Thank you, Dr. Linn. Thank you, Addie, for coming today. I just wanted to do one more shout out. That was from Studio School. Both of you have given up your afternoon to talk to everyone here and give them the insight to storytelling. Thank you, everybody here coming today, giving up your evening. Another shout out to Nick Ramos and Nancy Halukis from STN for coordinating this and putting this together. We really appreciate everybody coming out. It's really nice. Look for more of these to come, these opportunities to have this type of webinar. This has been Myth and Story. Thank you, everybody, for coming. We're going to sign off now. It's been a wonderful afternoon. Thank you for coming.
Thank you, everybody. Stay safe.